I happened to stumble upon a rather strange case that took place in the USA in the year 2001, a case that was incredibly creepy and quite disturbing. This case has been described as one of the most bizarre and fascinating in American history: the murder of Bonnie Lee Bakley. Bonnie Lee Bakley was born in 1946. She had 2 children from previous marriages and had a reputation in her early years for partying and living a carefree, promiscuous lifestyle. She was known to frequent bars and often boasted about being able to collect money from various men by telling them that she was pregnant with their child. However, when her social life and her scams began to fail her, she turned to a new tactic: the internet. In the mid-1990s, she took to various sites and entered numerous mail-order bride schemes, attracting many men with false claims that made them believe that they would be getting a beautiful, obedient wife. However, Bonnie used various aliases and used fake photos of her in an attempt to lure in potential husband material. She had used names such as Honey, Honeybun, Jerry, Ginger, Mary Ann, and of course, Bonnie. Her scams involved using various email addresses, phone numbers, and false addresses. She would sometimes use real estate offices and libraries to receive money and gifts that would be sent to her by the unfortunate souls who fell for her trap. Once she received money or gifts from these men, she would disappear and then write from a different location, pretending that it was her niece, telling the men that she was not interested in pursuing a relationship with them. But then she would reappear again under a new alias and a new email address and do the same thing over and over again. She would also use various fraud schemes. She claimed that she was a high-class model and used this to her advantage, especially when she targeted vulnerable or wealthy men. Despite the many, many warnings and red flags about this woman, Robert Blake took the bait. Robert was an American actor, most famous for his roles in the In Cold Blood movie and the TV series Beretta. Robert Blake was born in 1933. He grew up in a family of modest means. His mother worked as a seamstress and his father was a garment worker. Despite the two of them having a reportedly abusive relationship, Robert would go on to marry his childhood sweetheart, Sandra Kerr. The two married in 1955 and they had 2 children together. During a family gathering in 1990, Robert's son took the family dog for a walk, but when he returned, he discovered that the dog had been shot, and it turned out that Robert's daughter had shot the dog. Robert's daughter was arrested, and Robert was horrified at such a cruel act. He promptly filed for a divorce. However, in the year 2000, he met Bonnie. The two met online, and Robert thought he had found the perfect woman. Not long after meeting online, the two got married in a private ceremony in April of 2000. And they got married despite Robert having never met her in person until the wedding. By all accounts, the marriage was very rocky from the start. Bonnie came with a lot of baggage. She was 54 and he was 67. She had multiple children from various previous relationships, and she had a terrible reputation, as I just mentioned. Another issue was their sex life. Shortly after the marriage, Robert reportedly told his friends that the spark had gone. The couple had almost opposite interests. Bonnie wanted to go out and socialise, while Robert was in his 60s and he preferred now to be at home reading a good book. Bonnie also had trouble with Robert's friends. One of Robert's close friends would later say, "On a scale of 1 to 10, she was a 2.5. She and Robert had absolutely nothing in common." Another friend would later say, "I tried to like her, I really did, but there was just something about her that made you not like her." And the list of issues just went on and on and on. The couple moved to Studio City, a neighbourhood of Los Angeles. Friends of the couple would later recall seeing the two having dinner together at various restaurants, and the main topic of conversation was always Bonnie. She would tell stories of her past, her childhood, her previous marriages and previous relationships. The more they got to know her, the more they came to dislike her. One friend would later say, "She just wasn't very nice. You could not stand being around her." When the two got married, Bonnie had around $20,000 in cash, and Robert had a $1 million nest egg, all of which was emphatically earned through his acting career. And Bonnie had several fraudulent schemes and more mail-order bride sites going at the same time while she was married. On the 4th of May 2001, Robert and Bonnie attended a private dinner party at a restaurant called Vitello's. The couple arrived at the restaurant and, according to Robert, got along wonderfully. After the official dinner party was over, Robert asked if Bonnie wanted to stay for a little longer and eat dessert, and so they did. The two stayed behind at the restaurant and enjoyed some dessert together, and from what I can tell, things were going well. When they finished, Robert went to use the restroom, while Bonnie waited outside by the car, waiting for her husband to come back so they could drive home together. But But while Bonnie was waiting, Robert didn't just go to the restroom. He got into a full-blown argument with a waiter over the service they had received during the meal. Robert later admitted that he shouted at the waiter, telling him to get back in the kitchen and cook some food, claiming that the service was absolutely terrible. The waiter would later say he was a very rude man, and this waiter would later testify under oath during Robert's trial. Robert walked for a couple more minutes from the restroom and then entered the car. But by this time, Bonnie was already dead. From the moment Robert entered the car, he recalled seeing a lot of blood and Bonnie's eyes closed. He then looked up to see who was responsible, but there was no one around. All he could do was shout for help. The police soon arrived on the scene and the investigation began. I found it rather odd that the first thing the police did was to usher Robert away to a hotel so he could grieve in private. Following a high-profile murder, the last thing I would expect is for the husband to be allowed to leave the scene, and he was taken there in a police car. This was done so he would be secure, and so the media wouldn't bother him. But this was also done so the police could conduct a search of his car without him being there. With all the evidence pointing to an assassination due to Bonnie's incredibly shady past, the police were expecting to find the crime scene littered with bullets from a shootout and evidence that Bonnie fought back. But instead, there was one bullet and one gun. Bonnie had been shot in the head. The investigation and the trial would be held in what is known as the $500,000 courtroom, the very same courtroom where OJ was tried. So what exactly happened on that night? In Robert's first statement to the police, he gave a series of reasons why Bonnie might have been killed. He claimed that in the past she had several male admirers who at one point wanted to kill her, and that she also had a number of fake identities to hide and protect herself. Robert was adamant that the killing of Bonnie was a professional hit, as the killer was able to get in and out so quietly and effortlessly. And then Robert claimed that Bonnie had asked him to buy her a gun for self-protection. But this story seemed a little far-fetched, and as the investigation continued, the police began to believe that Robert just didn't want to be married to Bonnie anymore, and that he arranged for her to be killed. And there were a number of reasons why Robert could have wanted to have Bonnie out of the way. A hitman would cost anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 to carry out the killing. Robert was also planning on taking Bonnie on a number of long-haul flights. He was going to see his son who had cancer, and he didn't want Bonnie ruining the trip. And secondly, Robert had several life insurance policies taken out on Bonnie. In the event of her death, Robert would get a $400,000 payout each. And Bonnie had a bad habit. She would often speak to her friends, the media, and anyone who would listen about her ex-husbands and how she would steal from them and scam them. And this was while she was married to Robert. So there was also a possibility that Bonnie had plans to do the same to Robert. Not long after getting married, a number of Robert's credit cards were charged to hotels and various other establishments, and Robert was more than likely not happy about this. It seemed like more than enough reasons to want your wife dead. However, another theory was the possibility that Bonnie caught Robert cheating. While they were out, Robert had told Bonnie that he had to use the restroom. Robert walked into the restroom, but he didn't just blend in and out like he said in his first statement. He was gone for around 12 minutes, which was enough time for him to slip out of the back of the restaurant and into the car to kill Bonnie, or to meet someone who would be willing to do it for him. Basically, Robert left Bonnie alone and vulnerable for an incredibly long amount of time, when all she wanted to do was go home. Robert's initial statement to the police seemed to have a number of inconsistencies. Following this, Robert changed his story. In his second story, he claimed that he walked for a couple of minutes from the restroom and then entered the car to find Bonnie dead. During this second interview with the police, Robert was confronted with the fact that Bonnie caught him trying to slip out of the back of the restaurant to get into the car first, and it turned out that Robert had actually been in the restaurant for some time, chatting up a young waitress who worked at the restaurant. He was chatting her up so much, in fact, that one of the waiters said that he thought Robert had a love fest going on with the lady. The waitress also confirmed this too. Another one of the waiters would testify that Robert and Bonnie barely even spoke to each other, and that when they did, it was brief and it was all very cold. When Robert was confronted with the evidence that he had tried to get into the car and kill Bonnie, or meet someone who was going to kill Bonnie for him, he eventually admitted that he did slip out of the back of the restaurant. However, he claimed that he just wanted to get something for Bonnie. During this interview, Robert was advised to get a lawyer, and so he did. His first lawyer helped him to decide whether he should confess, and if he did, he would get a lesser sentence. Robert decided not to confess and was adamant that he was innocent. With Robert refusing to confess, his first lawyer advised him to stay on his story, and if he did, more than likely he would get away with the crime. Robert still had a number of other lawyers who tried to convince him to take this route, confess to the lesser crimes. However, Robert was adamant that he never killed Bonnie, and he never hired anyone to do it. And with this, Robert was charged with the murder of Bonnie. Robert was released and was allowed to be placed on house arrest and was set a bail of $10 million. In 2002, Bonnie's family filed cases against Robert, one for $50 million for the wrongful death of Bonnie, and another for punitive damages, where they were seeking a further $10 million. The trial would begin in 2005. Robert was found not guilty of murder, although the jury did find that Robert was liable for the wrongful death of Bonnie, and they awarded Bonnie's family $30 million. Bonnie's family launched numerous appeals. However, the amount was eventually upped to $100 million, but then $49 million of that was spent on legal fees. Robert would say after the trial that he was maxed out and exhausted, and was hoping that Bonnie's family and their lawyers would back off. Robert was broke and ill, and was living in a small one-bedroom apartment. Several people who witnessed the trial would later say that Robert appeared to be suffering from Alzheimer's, and of course this sparked numerous debates, with many speculating that Robert's innocent verdict was because he had Alzheimer's, and many believed him to be guilty. I also have to say that I personally find the case to be incredibly interesting and rather disturbing, but I am unsure as to whether or not Robert was the one responsible for the death of Bonnie.